The person you keep finding yourself thinking about is not showing up in your mind by accident. Even if things between you feel uncertain, confusing, or emotionally unresolved, there is usually a deeper reason why this presence keeps returning to your awareness. It is not simply because you are bored, lonely, or temporarily emotional. Something about this connection has left an imprint within you, and that imprint continues to surface in quiet and unexpected moments. You may notice it most when everything around you becomes still. When the day slows down, when your mind is no longer fully occupied, or when you are drifting between sleep and awareness, their presence seems to rise on its own. There is no effort involved. It simply happens. At times, even in the middle of ordinary routines, while you are working, speaking with others, or distracted by daily life, something small can trigger their memory. A feeling, a sound, a smell, a place, or a passing thought suddenly brings their face, their voice, or a shared moment back into focus without warning. These experiences are often so natural that they feel like they are happening beneath your control. You might try to focus elsewhere. You might try to occupy your mind with other things, convincing yourself that you should move on or that it is better not to think about them anymore. You may remind yourself of the distance, the silence, or the uncertainty that exists between you. You might even question your own thoughts, wondering whether you are giving too much meaning to something unclear or holding on to an idea that has no solid foundation. Yet despite all of that mental effort, the thoughts still return. Not constantly, but consistently enough that you notice the pattern. Even when you feel like you have reached clarity or emotional distance, something within you still reacts when this person comes to mind. It can feel frustrating at times, or even confusing, because part of you wants to let go while another part continues to hold the memory gently in place, as if it still carries unfinished emotional information. This does not mean something is wrong with you. It does not mean you are stuck or unable to move forward in life. It simply suggests that what you experienced carried emotional weight. Human connections are not always created through logic or deliberate intention. They are formed through shared moments, emotional exchanges, repeated exposure, vulnerability, and subtle impressions that build over time in ways the conscious mind does not always fully register or immediately interpret. When someone continues to appear in your thoughts without effort, it often reflects that something within that experience has not fully reached closure in your inner world. Closure is not only about endings in the external sense, it is also about how fully the emotional system has processed what happened. There may have been emotions that were felt deeply but never fully expressed, acknowledged, or understood. There may have been moments that carried meaning but were never clearly defined. And sometimes there may have been expectations that formed silently within you, even without agreement or confirmation from the other person. Because of this, your mind does not fully file the experience away as something finished. Instead, it revisits it from time to time, as if trying to complete a pattern that is still open-ended. This is how emotional memory works. It does not always follow timelines, decisions, or rational conclusions. It follows feeling, meaning, and internal significance. The mind is not only storing facts, it is storing emotional experiences as living impressions that can be reactivated by subtle cues. There is also a neurological aspect to this process. The brain strengthens pathways around emotionally significant experiences. When something affects you deeply, the mind does not treat it as ordinary information. It marks it as important. That is why even small reminders can reactivate a full emotional memory. Over time, these pathways can become familiar routes in your mental landscape, which is why certain thoughts seem to appear on their own, without conscious invitation. It is also possible that the other person carries their own internal experience of this connection. Even if there is no communication, even if nothing is being expressed outwardly, people often hold thoughts and emotions privately. Not everyone acts on what they feel right away. Some people remain silent not because they feel nothing, but because they are uncertain, hesitant, emotionally overwhelmed, or still trying to understand their own internal responses. Human emotional processing is not always synchronized between two people. Silence, however, does not always mean absence. Distance does not always mean disconnection on every level. Sometimes it reflects hesitation, emotional complexity, fear of vulnerability, or unresolved inner conflict. What is not spoken can still exist internally, even if it is never shared openly. At the same time, it is important to hold this possibility lightly without building certainty on it, because inner emotional experience is never something you can fully verify from the outside. At times, emotions connected to this person may surface in you without a clear reason. A sudden wave of warmth, nostalgia, sadness, longing, or even calmness might arise without any obvious trigger. These feelings can appear unexpectedly, as if they are rising from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. This is often how emotional bonds behave when they have not been fully processed or integrated. The emotional system continues working in the background even when the conscious mind has shifted focus elsewhere. Dreams can also become part of this process. The mind often uses sleep to reorganize emotional information, replaying fragments of memory or symbolically processing unresolved feelings. Even if dreams are not literal reflections of reality, they can still reveal how strongly a connection is held in the emotional system. They are not messages about fate, but expressions of internal processing. Still, it is important to remain grounded in your own life and needs. Feeling a strong emotional connection does not mean you are meant to pause your growth or remain waiting indefinitely. It only reflects that something meaningful touched you. What mattered to you leaves an imprint, and that imprint does not disappear instantly just because time passes or circumstances remain unclear. But your life continues moving forward regardless of that imprint, and your emotional development continues alongside it. Confusion does not erase emotional significance. Distance does not automatically cancel what was felt. Silence does not always represent emotional emptiness. Sometimes it simply means there is more happening beneath the surface that is not visible from the outside, and sometimes it simply means the connection exists more strongly in memory than in present reality. Both can be true at the same time without contradiction. A key part of emotional growth is learning to hold both truth and uncertainty together without forcing premature conclusions. You can acknowledge that something mattered deeply to you while also accepting that you may not have full access to the other person's internal world. You can recognize emotional impact without turning it into assumption. You can value what you felt without needing it to define your direction forward. No matter what the other person is experiencing internally, your feelings remain valid. Your thoughts are not meaningless. Your emotional responses are not random. They are part of how your mind and heart process connection, memory, attachment, and meaning over time. Emotional experience is not something to be judged for its persistence, but something to be understood for what it reveals about your capacity to feel and connect. Eventually, all emotional experiences move toward resolution in one form or another. Sometimes that resolution comes through understanding when you begin to see the experience more clearly and without confusion. Sometimes it comes through acceptance, when you no longer need answers in order to feel at peace. And sometimes it comes simply through time, allowing emotional intensity to soften gradually without force or resistance. What remains important is not forcing yourself to suppress what you feel or rushing yourself into detachment, but allowing yourself to understand your experience with patience and honesty. Emotional processing is not linear. It moves in waves, cycles, and phases. There may be moments of clarity followed by moments of emotional return, and that rhythm is part of integration rather than failure. If this person continues to appear in your thoughts, it is because something within that experience still carries meaning for you. It does not necessarily define your future, and it does not mean you are meant to remain emotionally anchored in the same space forever. It only means that what you felt was real enough to leave an imprint, and meaningful experiences do not vanish instantly from the mind or heart. Over time, that imprint will either transform, settle, or integrate into your personal story in a calmer, more neutral way. The emotional charge will gradually reduce, not because the experience becomes less significant, but because it becomes more understood and less emotionally charged. What once felt heavy or uncertain begins to feel like part of your inner history rather than an active emotional pull. Until then, it is important to be gentle with yourself, without judgment, without pressure, and without forcing emotional timelines that your inner world is not ready to follow. Your emotional system is not broken for remembering. It is simply processing meaning at its own pace, in its own rhythm, until what is unresolved becomes understood and what is intense becomes integrated into quiet awareness. Do not be harsh with your own thoughts, and do not try to force your feelings to disappear before they are ready. Real understanding rarely arrives under pressure. It unfolds slowly, in its own time, when the mind becomes patient enough to let things settle on their own. Sometimes a connection is not meant to last in a permanent, visible way. Instead, it enters your life to shift something within you, to teach you what you needed to learn, and to reconnect you with the depth of your own emotional world. Even when things feel confusing, even when silence replaces communication, the emotional meaning of what you experienced does not simply vanish. When someone continues to occupy your thoughts in a steady and persistent way, it often points to something within you that has not fully closed. It is not just repetition without reason. It reflects an inner process that is still trying to understand what was felt, what was left unsaid, and what was never brought to a clear ending. Human beings are not usually disturbed by experiences that feel complete. What lingers in the mind is what remains open, unfinished, or emotionally unresolved. This is why certain people return to your thoughts without effort. You may notice it in simple moments, when something good happens and your first instinct is to share it with them, or when a small detail of your day appears in your mind as something they would understand. Even in the middle of a busy routine, your thoughts may briefly drift toward them, not because you are searching for them, but because your inner world still associates meaning with their presence. There can also be a quiet sense of curiosity about how they are doing, even when life continues normally around you. It is not always about physical closeness. Sometimes it feels like an emotional awareness, a sense of their presence in your inner landscape, as if part of you is still tuned to their emotional state in a subtle way. These experiences often happen when a connection has reached a depth where it leaves an imprint on memory and emotion at the same time. Emotional bonds do not dissolve instantly just because communication stops. Silence does not automatically erase what was once meaningful. Distance does not immediately undo what was built over time through shared experiences and emotional exchange. When two people connect deeply, that experience is stored not only in memory, but also in the unconscious layer of the mind, where meaning matters more than logic or time. Because of this, your mind may return to them without invitation, not because you are forcing it, but because something within you still recognizes unfinished emotional material. The unconscious mind does not think in linear timelines. It revisits what feels unresolved until it gradually finds a way to understand or soften it. At times, this connection may also reflect something deeper about your own inner experience. Certain people do not just represent themselves in our memory, they also represent a version of us that existed in their presence. The way you felt, the way you opened up, the way you experienced yourself around them becomes part of the emotional imprint. Losing access to that feeling can sometimes feel like losing a part of your own inner world, which is why the longing can feel so strong and layered. There are also deeper human patterns at play. Some people carry emotional exhaustion from past experiences. Some have learned to protect themselves so strongly that closeness feels both desired and threatening at the same time. Some struggle internally with fear, timing, or emotional readiness, even when real feeling is present beneath the surface. This is why silence is not always equal to absence of care. Sometimes it reflects internal conflict that has not yet been resolved. However, it is also important to hold balance in your understanding. Emotional depth alone is not enough to sustain or build a healthy connection. Love cannot replace personal growth, self-awareness, or emotional responsibility. No matter how strong your feelings are, you cannot heal someone else's inner fears or unresolved patterns through persistence alone. True connection requires mutual readiness, mutual effort, and emotional maturity from both sides. Some people remain attached to what they feel, but struggle to act on it. Others feel torn between desire and fear. Others believe they must fix themselves before allowing closeness again. These internal struggles are often invisible from the outside, but they influence behavior in ways that create distance, confusion, or inconsistency. This is why your mind continues to return to certain thoughts, especially in quiet moments. When external distractions fade, the deeper emotional layers become more active. At night or during stillness, the unconscious mind speaks more clearly, bringing forward what has not yet been fully processed. These thoughts are not being forced. They arise naturally from within, carrying emotional information that still needs attention. It is also important to recognize that when you think of this person, you are not only remembering them. You are also remembering the version of yourself that existed in that connection. The feelings, the openness, the emotional aliveness you experienced at that time become part of what your mind is revisiting. This is why the attachment can feel deeper than surface attraction or simple memory. Sometimes, what feels like longing for another person is also a longing for a feeling state you once accessed through them. This does not make the connection less real, it simply adds another layer to why it stays active in your inner world. Emotional experiences that are intense or meaningful rarely disappear in a straight line. They fluctuate. One day you may feel detached, grounded, and clear. Another day, a small reminder can bring everything back with surprising intensity. This back and forth is not a sign of confusion or weakness. It is part of how emotional processing naturally unfolds over time. What matters most is not forcing closure or rushing meaning, but allowing your understanding to grow at its own pace. With time, what feels heavy or unresolved begins to settle, not because it is erased, but because it is integrated into your story in a calmer, clearer way. And through that process, you begin to see the connection not as something that controls your thoughts, but as something that once carried meaning, shaped your emotions, and became part of your personal growth. What you're describing here is a layered emotional experience where the conscious mind and the emotional mind seem to be moving in different directions. One part of you tries to make sense of things logically, to protect you from confusion, uncertainty, or emotional pain. The other part still carries the feeling of connection underneath, even when you try to move forward mentally. These two inner systems don't always align, and that tension is often where overthinking, emotional attachment, and inner conflict begin to overlap in a very subtle but powerful way. In moments like this, the mind often tries to create order out of something that is emotionally unfinished. Logic starts building explanations, searching for clarity, patterns, or certainty, while the emotional layer continues to respond to memory, meaning, and attachment. This is why a person can feel done in one moment and deeply emotionally involved in another. It is not contradiction in the sense of confusion alone, but rather different parts of the inner system processing the same experience at different speeds. Healing is not about forcing yourself to erase what you felt or pretending it never mattered. It is more about understanding why the bond still exists in your inner world and what it is trying to show you at this stage of your life. Sometimes a connection remains active in your thoughts because there is still emotional meaning attached to it. Sometimes it remains because something was never fully expressed or clearly ended, so the mind keeps revisiting it to find closure that was never externally given. And sometimes it remains because both people are going through their own timing, growth, and internal processes, even if they are not moving in sync or even aware of each other's inner state. Emotional timing in life is rarely perfectly matched between two people. One person may feel ready while the other is still processing fear, uncertainty, past emotional experiences, or personal history that shapes their reactions. If someone feels distant but emotionally significant to you, it can often reflect internal conflict within them rather than a complete absence of feeling. A person can experience care, attachment, curiosity, or even love while still being unable to act on it clearly in the moment due to hesitation, fear of vulnerability, emotional conditioning, or concerns about consequences they are not yet prepared to face. Love does not always present itself through direct action, consistent communication, or visible emotional expression. In some situations, it exists quietly alongside caution, restraint, and internal struggle. A person may think about you more than they express, may feel more than they show, and may even wonder about your feelings too, while still holding back because they are unsure of the outcome or not emotionally prepared to take the next step into something that feels exposing or unpredictable. In such cases, silence is not always emptiness. It can also be hesitation shaped by internal emotional weight, overthinking, or a need for self-protection. At the same time, it is important not to lose balance in how you interpret these feelings. Emotional depth alone does not guarantee mutual action, readiness, or alignment. Even if strong feelings exist, they do not automatically translate into movement, communication, or commitment. People often carry unresolved experiences, past emotional wounds, fear of rejection, fear of losing control, or fear of repeating old patterns that affect how they respond to present connections. These internal layers can create distance even when emotion is present and even when connection is real on some level. From a psychological perspective, what often keeps someone in your thoughts is not only the person themselves, but also what they represented to you emotionally. Certain connections activate a deeper part of your inner world where memory, meaning, identity, and emotional imagination overlap. You may not only miss the person, but also the version of yourself that existed in that emotional space, the way you felt, the way you opened up, the hope you experienced, or even the intensity of your emotional awareness at that time. That is why the attachment can feel stronger than simple attraction or routine memory, because it is tied to emotional identity, not just presence. When something remains unresolved emotionally, the mind tends to revisit it in quiet moments. Not because it is stuck in the past, but because the brain naturally tries to organize unfinished emotional information. The human mind is not satisfied with gaps in meaning, especially when emotions were involved. It continues to replay scenarios, reinterpret memories, or imagine alternative outcomes in an attempt to create internal closure. This is more noticeable at night, during stillness, or when external distractions are reduced. In those moments, internal feelings surface more clearly because there is less noise covering them, and the emotional layer becomes more audible in your awareness. However, clarity also comes with time and honest reflection. Not every emotional bond is meant to become a lasting connection in its original form. Some experiences are meant to teach you about your emotional capacity, your boundaries, your attachment patterns, your expectations, or your ability to feel deeply without losing yourself in it. Others may simply show you what kind of connection you truly desire, what kind of emotional safety you need, and what you can no longer accept if you want stability in your life moving forward. If someone feels distant but still present in your thoughts, it does not automatically mean they are thinking of you in the same way or with the same intensity. Human emotions are complex, layered, and often private. While mutual feelings are possible, they are never something that can be confirmed purely through internal experience alone. What you are feeling is real on your side, shaped by your perception, memory, and emotional system, but their internal state remains their own, influenced by factors you may not fully see or understand. What matters most in this kind of emotional experience is not building assumptions, but learning what the connection is doing within you. It may be revealing patterns of attachment, showing where you tend to hold on longer than necessary, teaching patience, highlighting emotional needs, or guiding you toward deeper self-understanding. Sometimes it also shows where emotional hope becomes stronger than emotional reality, and where you may need to gently release without forcing yourself into denial or emotional suppression. It is also normal for emotions like longing, warmth, sadness, uncertainty, or hope to come and go in waves. Emotional processing is not linear. It does not move in a straight path from attachment to detachment. Instead, it moves in cycles of clarity and return, distance and reflection, acceptance and memory. One day you may feel detached and grounded, and another day a memory, a phrase, or even a feeling you cannot explain can bring back emotional intensity. This fluctuation is not regression, it is integration. It is how emotional experiences gradually settle into the inner structure of your memory. Over time, the intensity usually softens, not because the experience becomes meaningless, but because it becomes understood. What once felt confusing, heavy, or emotionally consuming begins to settle into something more stable within your memory. You may still remember, but without the same emotional turbulence attached to it. The emotional charge reduces, and what remains is awareness, understanding, and perspective, rather than inner conflict. In the end, what you are experiencing is a natural interaction between memory, emotion, and meaning. It reflects that something important was felt, even if it was not fully completed, clearly defined, or mutually aligned. And while the mind may continue to revisit it for a while, your growth is not measured by how quickly you forget or detach, but by how deeply you understand what the experience added to your emotional life, how it shaped your awareness, and how it guides you in choosing what aligns with your emotional well-being going forward.